scared when people introduce you, because then there are expectations. Trust me, I will meet none of them while we're here. But that's okay, because that's who we are. And so all we can do is the best that we can at that point in time. So always remember that in whatever you're doing, and particularly when you're preaching, because in sometimes that will be an off day, let me tell you. I've had it. I said, I don't know what I'm doing, and I have no idea what I'm going to preach. And then it comes. Maybe in the midnight hours, but it comes. And actually that happened to me, and actually it was the best one that I had ever done, evidently, because everyone wanted a copy. They were stopping me, and I said, are you kidding? Thinking in my mind, I don't know what I did. I don't know what I said. I mean, I had it written down, but it was just like, whoa, okay. So you never know how the Holy Spirit is moving. You never know what's going on in a person's life, that something just kind of clicks. And you were there for that time. And you just go out and rejoice and get ready for the next time for that. I didn't mean to start out that way, but that's where it goes. But I'm hoping that we will have a conversation, because I do want you to ask questions, and I'll try to answer them the best I can in terms of what has happened to me. My other cohorts, who at least two of them who are still lay preaching, would probably say, and you said what? And I said, hey, you remember those days when we were doing such and such. Yes, I do want you to ask questions. I want us to have conversation, over the hour and a half we're going to be together, and so that we can just keep going over this and being just a little more comfortable than we were when we walked through the door, okay? So, Stephen wanted me to just, write on the life, of a lay preacher. And I said, what life? I have no life, I don't know what that is. I said, so I'm going to have a difficult time expressing that, but I'm going to give you a little piece of me, some of the things that have happened over the course of time. And you can stop me anytime if if something pops up and you say, ooh, I really want to know a little bit more, about what I'm talking about. I grew up in a small town, and I grew up AME. And and even more than that, I tell people that I can't do anything more than I'm doing now, and it's natural for me to do it, because that's all I knew. And as I'm working, I'm a social worker. I forgot to tell you that. That's important. Because as I'm working with clients and expressing the fact of how important you're raised, how you were raised, what was your childhood like, what happened in those times, because most of the time you are carrying that forward. That baggage doesn't sit back here, and that you are carrying it forward becomes part of you, becomes part of your body. The body keeps the score, and we know that when we get in all of that stress, all of that trauma, then we've had it. So it is very important, to hear about where people have come from, because it gives you an idea and a direction of where they go. And so my parents were Christian people. They were churchgoers. And this is the interesting thing. In Sunday school, I went to Sunday school every Sunday. And either the Sunday school teacher or the superintendent of Sunday school picked us up. My parents did not take me. They made sure we got there, my sister and I. And we were there every Sunday, and they would religiously always come by and pick us up. That's community. That's part of it. And then I began doing piano lessons when I was about 5 years old. And so my next joy, I think, was becoming the pianist for our Sunday school. And so I would, and so I would play there, for things. The song I'll never forget is "In the Garden," which most of you probably know. And I was playing that song, and one of my friend's mothers, began to cry because that song was played at her mother's funeral. And that really got to me. That, it upset me. I'm a teenager. I'm not sure, and I'm not really understanding what that meant, except that this was a song that was so meaningful to her for that very reason. And then we keep going, and I go on to college. And I got into the Episcopal Church because I went to Urbana, what was Urbana College at that time. It did become a university 4 years, but it was 2 years. And those 2 years, the psychologist who taught at the school was the minister and the pastor at the Epiphany, Church of the Epiphany in Urbana. And I had always wondered about that church. I think all of us did. And it was around the corner from where I went to church. But I had never gone to the church. And it was the church that you can understand this. It was one of those churches that was predominantly white. They were wealthy. And it was not a place that was for you, okay? So, but you wondered about it, and you wondered who are they, and what do they do? And that panned out, for most of the time. So I went, and so he was there, Professor Schneiderman was his name, and he was so delightful. I mean, it was just a warmth about him, that just drew you. And you said, wow, I want to know more. I want to know more. And so a friend of mine who I actually grew up with, and then those whom I was going to school with were Episcopalians. And they said, well, come on and go, go with us, and go to church. I said, okay. And so there I go. And, and it's a lovely church. It's a beautiful church in Urbana. Stephen can attest to that. And I went and enjoyed myself immensely. I knew half the people in there anyway. Urbana's a small town, about 13,000, so you're going to know everybody. And I ended up, becoming an Episcopalian from there. And so that was my journey and beginning, on that time frame and what was going on. Meanwhile, my parents are still very much involved in the AME church. And my parents were wonderful about all of this because it didn't matter where you went. They were glad I was going. They said, fine, And so they were happy about that. And supportive, about that. And of course, they knew everyone because my parents were the type of parents that I've ended up being. And that is, leadership roles. If anything happened in Urbana, particularly if it had to do with race, and there were some issues, they would always come to my father and want to talk with him about it, and figure out, what to do, how are we going to do it, and what's going to happen. So my parents were like that. They were just, leaders. And so that was, part of what happened, in that time frame. And so I enjoyed that. And then I went off to Ohio State University. And from Ohio State, I discovered St. Philip Episcopal Church and started going there actually after, I want to say it was after I left there and then started working, and then I started going over there. And I loved it. I just loved it. And I knew, again, I'm going to tell you this. This is something, I don't need enemies. I have too many friends. You know what I mean? And these are friends that sometimes you just say, ooh, where's my enemy? This, because it just doesn't work in the way that you think. So again, I'm over there because of friends, because of people whom I knew, loved, and trusted. And that's how I got there. And I just fit right in and have never left. Some of them would like for me to go. I'm senior warden right now. And I don't have a pastor. Now you can understand my personality in that, can't you? I'm having myself a ball in this church. Until we get a pastor, I'm gonna have to move out because I will have done so much. By the time they come, they're like, oh boy, what has she done? But and I just retired, my 5th retirement, I think, again from friends who have asked me to do things for them on Wednesday of this week, actually. And so I'm looking forward to moving all my stuff to St. Philip Episcopal Church and creating an office. So that's where my new office will be. So if you want me, just call the church, I'll be there. So that's another thing, that's going on, and a thing that I really enjoy and love. So how did I get to lay preaching? Well, part of it was because I was on the Commission on Ministry, and it was at the time the General Convention, made the decision to put us in the canons. Well, wasn't that wonderful of them? I just thought, good for you. You finally realize that we're out here and we need to do things, so they put us in the canons. And I said, okay. And they added a couple of things, one of them being lay preaching. And I thought, whoa, look at this. So then it was the responsibility of the diocese then, to create, programs and to create a way. And our diocese, I was on the Commission on Ministry, so I said, look, I want to be on the subcommittee so that we can look at each one of these areas, decide the qualifications, what we're looking for and what to do. And so that's what we did. And lay preaching was one of them. And once we got that finished, then it was to go back and say, okay, what are we going to do with this? We've created and we've put down what we need, and what happens, what are we going to do? And it took a little discussion. As you well know, in diocese, it takes a lot of discussion, but we got it done. And they decided, to create the lay preaching program, of which Stephen and Leanne decided that they wanted to be the teachers for this. And myself and 3 others decided that we wanted to be the first. And so we, wrote whatever we needed to, did whatever we needed to do in order, for us to do that. I've felt a call for this for quite some time. Just those little, what was it, soft whisperings we heard this morning. That, I've heard loud thunder here and there. Yes, you're going to do this. But I've known it for quite some time. I could say that my father was a lay preacher in the AME church. And my uncle was an ordained preacher in the AME church. And so I do come from, that background and understanding. But I also knew that this was my journey and not theirs. And so I needed to look at it and what does it mean for me and how it is that I can go with that. So that's what, that's what I did. And thank God, I think, Stephen and Leanne and the others, decided that I certainly was one that they wanted, to be part of this group. I think they asked the questions later on because we did get into some discussions. I don't know if Stephen told you that at the very beginning we were to do 3 years rather than 2. And we kept asking those questions, and we sort of went with the program and said, wait a minute, if you're going to be a priest, you got to do 3 years. All we're doing is preaching every single time we're getting together. What's the 3 years? And we were required, as you well know, to do some other things, pre. So we kind of went through that, and then they finally said, you're right, 2 years. 2 years should be good. I think he might want to change that later on, but 2 years at that point was good. And we learned so much from both Stephen and Leanne. We learned so much on what they did and how they did it, and how much they wanted us to understand about the preaching, and what you're doing, when you're standing up there and you're there for God. You really are there for God. You are His messenger for sure on that day. And that becomes a little overwhelming at points in time because of our being the human beings that we are. We never feel quite worthy enough to do what it is that we're doing. But our hope is in God. Our hope is in that He has made the right decision. He knows He's made the right decision. We just need to understand that He's made that right decision and what it is that we want to do and how we're going to do it, okay? So when I first began after that, call, and after we were there, I was excited. I really was excited about this, this new way of connecting. New way of being, new way of doing, new way of maybe making a difference, in this life. So that was exciting. Then I got to the fear. And that was another thing. And so, you realize that you're trying to tell God's story and all the weaknesses that go with that and your unworthiness to do that very thing. But you push forward, and with not only, doing the scary thing, but the desire and longing, to do it. So this was an unknown for me, and an unknown for the other 3 that were there. But we were willing to push forward and to do. The other thing that I do want to point out at this point in time is that you can't walk into God's house and step into His pulpit without permission. You just can't do that. And you have to know that He wants you there and has high expectations of you as a teacher and a preacher. He wants you there. So it's a scary thought that He thinks you are worthy. It's a very scary thought with all the weaknesses and so forth that we have. The canons are important. They're important in the governance of our church. Sometimes I think that we do too much with it, and thinking about the sermon tomorrow, do too much with it. Because then we get bogged down into canons and, which are the rules and the regs and the policies that you abide by being a member of this church. And sometimes that can stop you from really expressing and being who it is that you need to be. And so we haven't quite found the balance. But I'm hoping that we can keep working at it, and we're going to get there, with it. Some of the things that folks will ask you is, what's your theology? What's your philosophy? Where is it that you're coming from and what you're doing and how are you doing it? Mine is more of the Black liberation theology, as you probably would not be surprised about. That comes from experience of being a Black female in this world. It also is one that really purposefully goes after the justice piece of this, the mercy side of this. And that speaks to my soul. So if I were to name anything at all, it would be that. It would be that. And so you can think about that as you look at the various, pieces and parts of that puzzle and see where is it that you fit and what is it that you really want to bring out as you are standing there and speaking to the people. Okay? Any questions up to that point? The only thing that I can say a little bit more about that is that Black liberation theology also gives you hope. And I never, ever want to be in a spot where I don't have that. I don't have hope for what it is that I know we as a people can be and can do. And so that's another thing that also draws me into this picture. I'm not an ordained preacher, and I never intend to be, nor do I want to be, as probably Stephen and others, those of you who know me well know. I would probably have made it about maybe 2 or 3 weeks after my ordination, and then it would have been over because it would have been something I didn't like, and the bishop would have liked it, and we would have had this discussion of which probably would not have come out in my favor. But I can tell you, it just wouldn't work. It wasn't for me. I knew that. I knew it wasn't for me. I knew that I was a lay person, and I wanted to do what lay people do. And I wanted to be there, not so much of confrontation or, argument or whatever, but to be there as a partner. A partner with the bishop, a partner with the standing committee, a partner with the diocesan council, a partner, so that we all should be walking in the same direction and wanting the same purpose and ending, to this game. We really have to look at where we're walking. And I say this to my students who are looking for jobs and so forth. I said, the one thing that was never taught to me, which is so very, very important, is that when you are looking for a job, don't just look for the job, just to get the job or that it's there, but what about the agency, the organization? Who are you working for? Do they have the same morals and values that you do? And are we walking in that same direction? Because 9 times out of 10, if they don't, you're going to come at this place. You're going to come there. And it will be such a dissonance that you're going to have to figure out, how am I going to get out of this, what it is I'm going to do, where can I go next? So I want you to remember that as you are preaching and teaching and guiding, other people, that this is so important. And it was never ever said to me as I was looking, as I was out looking for my first job. Never mentioned, and yet it became so very important, after I got in. I ended up in the public health department, which at one point was not political. It ended up being political during my time, and being with them, but it wasn't, and it was so wonderful because public health is the only agency in any of your states that is responsible for every single person that resides in that state. Every single person. All of the other agencies are divided up accordingly. Education is for education purposes. Mental health are for those with mental health. For those with mental retardation, it's the same way. It's all of this. But we're the only ones that are responsible for everyone in that state. And so we should never, ever not be at the table. Kept emphasizing that too. Never, ever not be at the table. But it depends on who's leading, and who's guiding and the direction that they, want to go in, okay? So that was another thing that I really picked up and was really very important, are how we are living out, our morals and our values in this life. God's world is inclusive, and that's so very important for us to remember. It is inclusive. He has not kept out anyone at all. We have, but he has not. And so we have to learn and work with how we alter that. How do we change that? What do we do with that? And one of the things that I'm beginning to learn, when you get old, you figure things out differently than when you're younger. It's like, okay, I'm really beginning to get this. But I'm beginning to ask the questions, and these are questions that you can, pose as you are preaching. And the question is around, how can I live in peace and harmony given the differences that we have? How can I live in peace and harmony given the differences? And what I mean by that is we can take guns, and gun violence is a very good example. And anyone who knows me knows I wish I could get rid of every gun in this entire world. That would be fine for me. I don't want any of them around. I don't care if they're for, entertainment or whatever. I don't want them. But I know that there are people who don't, even my husband, who doesn't agree with me. So I'm saying to myself, now we could argue this out all day long. You're on this side, I'm on this side. And we're not going to get anywhere. So I need to ask the question, how can you help me feel safe? How can you help me feel protected in a world filled with guns? And so those are the things that we need to be asking, rather than, it's my way, or it's my way, or, his way over here, and never the twain meet. We have to begin to think about the fact that we all are different. God made us different purposefully. And we need to figure out how it is that we can, in fact, come together as one. As one. And so we need to begin to ask those kinds of questions rather than, I'm right. And I am right, but he's right too. I can usually get away with that at home for a minute. But, he's right too. And we will never know for sure, until we see God face to face. And we will find out all these questions that we keep asking, and we're not sure about. Our gut tells us one way to go, and we need to go with that. But those are some of the things that we need, to think about as we're preaching and we're teaching on how we can begin to get people to have a conversation in a different way. I preach fairly often. I was getting ready to say I don't preach that often, but I really do preach fairly often. I say fairly. I actually could be preaching the entire year 2 or 3 times a month at one church. And Nancy would love that, because then she doesn't need to search all over the place for anybody else, though. But she does enjoy it. And in the parishioners enjoy, my coming. So, but it's my timing. My problem is my church that I'm now responsible for in more ways than one, but that I'm also a lay Eucharistic minister. I sing in the choir. I'm one of the counters, for our church. I'm on the altar guild. I mean, it's, it just goes on and on and on. And we asked that question this morning, didn't he? He asked that question about, are we on all the stuff other than? Yes. And so it gets problematic. Now that I've retired, at least from one thing, and it really did take a lot of energy and time, for me to do it, I really need to sit down and think about that and figure out how I can preach more. In my church, when we had a minister, I was able to preach, like once a month or once every other month or whatever. And what I do now is when our priest is not there, on a Sunday, then I choose to do morning prayer. I have had Stephen, though. I did have Stephen come over and preach one Sunday when we did not, our priest was not there. But I really choose to do morning prayer. And one of them is, it does give me a chance to preach, in my home church. And it does give the deacon, whom we have, an opportunity to preach also. So that's what I usually do when she's not there. So, it fairly often, and it could be far more often than it has been. In our diocese, there are some who just preach often, like regularly. Spencer, I think Spencer, when Phyllis was there at the church, she's now Bishop of Utah. So sorry that we're losing her, but so happy for them. She really allowed him to preach often, very often, and loved it, is very supportive of it. So once again, when you have a rector, that needs to be part of what that rector is coming for. So when we're looking for a rector, that's one of the questions we need to ask, where are you with this, and how supportive are you? Because it's very important. But the other part, and what we've tried to do, is that our goal was really to get our names out, so that people could call us, and we would, just go wherever, someone needed us. Now that hasn't happened that much. We've done it, but there hasn't been, that much call for us to, to be there. So I think we need to look at how we work this a different way, and do it, because I don't think that we need to be just at our church. I think we're there for the diocese, and we need to figure out how we're really there for the diocese, so that whenever they need you, they can do that. He asked in my preaching, how do I find my career as a social worker? Very important. It's a lot. It really is. And I was just telling someone, I could go for years after having spent a couple of years with the women and men that I've been working with on drug and alcohol addiction. There's just no real way of our trying to understand that. And mental health goes with it. And we have to be honest, with ourselves, how receptive is our church? How receptive is our church for all of this that we know is out there? I'm speaking part of my sermon tomorrow, but that's okay. As I'm saying in here, I'm like, you're saying that tomorrow, or some of it, which has to do with the brokenness of us, all of us. We find that, disability is disability. I'm disabled. I'm going to tell you, after yesterday's trip, I know I'm disabled. I'm going to raise my hand first and say, where's the wheelchair? And I want it, and that's hard. And I was telling the guys that over there in our treatment center, I said, that's hard. because I was an active person and I was able to do all of these things. And I can't do them in that way anymore. And that is hard to accept. I said, so I can get a sense of where they're going and what they're going through when I'm saying that you can no longer have this at all if you want to maintain sobriety. You cannot have it, period. And you have to get rid of people, places, and things if you want to maintain that. That's hard. That's hard. So yes, do I use it? Yes, absolutely, because that's part of me and part of the justice and the mercy, and part of what we should be doing as a church that we're not. We're not. And so how do we, as people, and particularly us who are out there in the world all the time, how do we bring that in and just lay it straight out there? Because they can't fire you. I say that all the time when I'm about ready to do something. I said, well, you can't fire me. You might get upset or whatever, but you really just can't do that. So let's figure out how we can work this out, because we need it. We need it. I try to find out about the congregation before I get there, and that's part of it in doing that. When I first started, with St. Edward's, was to find out, what is this congregation like? Who are they? And get some sense of that, so that I knew. St. Edward's is an interesting population because a lot of it is African, a lot of it is Liberian, and that makes a difference. That makes a difference in what it is that I'm doing, in speaking and preaching. So yes, that's the way that I try to do it in that. But I will tell you the theme of it, or what's going, is not, I'm as bad as Michael Curry. I'm love, and the love is going to be in there somewhere, what it is that we need to do. So that theme's not going to leave me, and then the other thing that I will do is I'm going to challenge the congregation, and in Columbus, the blessing is that I worked for the state of Ohio. And so I know the state of Ohio, and I can, in fact, so that helps me, where I'm going, in some place or other, because I know the population somewhat, in that area too. So I'm going to challenge them, about what are you doing here, with this. You can't just walk into his church on a Sunday, praise and worship, be happy you've seen everyone, walk out that door, do nothing during the week, and come back the next week. We can't afford it any longer. We have to change. And we are the ones that have been assigned to go out and speak that word, talk it, and make sure that they hear it. Make sure that they hear it and be there for them. Don't just walk in and walk out the door. Offer whatever it is that you can to support them in doing what they're doing, or what they need to do, So if it's nothing, then going back and letting the diocese know, you need to get down there because this is what they're trying to do and they're having a difficult time in doing it. I know now I'm really working on resources, for our church, but it's not only ours, it'd be any other church that's out there, and looking for money, looking for places that we may never have thought to look, before, and seeing what it is that we can get in support, of what we're doing. How can we recruit people? I mean, we've lost so many at St. Philip. I know that you were probably surprised at the numbers. We have on any given Sunday, and this is both through the Zoom live streaming that we do now, as well as in church, about 70, 75 people. And these are mostly elderly, And we have to really work at what do we want this church to be? And we know that this is not what we want. We've never been this way. And I would like to see us get back to what we were, and what we did. It was more what we did. I mean, we were out there and about and, really working with the community. And we have a very vulnerable community that sits just right next door, behind us, at the side of us, all around us. And so we really need to reach out to that community more than we have. Oh, yes. Oh, don't think that this church is really in favor. I tell you, I sit at convention, and you see all these, everybody. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, let's do, we're going to do that. And, got my hand up. I said, no. Go back to their diocese and see what they're going to do with it. I said, because 9 times out of 10, they're going to turn around and say, no, they're going to find a way on how that's not going to be done. But if you sit in that room, you think, whoa, look at this place. This is what's happening. And you're right. And I'm not sure, listen, Stephen and Peter and the rest, the Episcopal Church Foundation, this is who is beginning to make that difference. You know what I mean? You need to get them in that frame. And so they're in that framework. And so it really becomes, how do we support them? How do we do what we're doing, and do it well, and to look for others, that may possibly, get on board. But it is a little bit at a time. It borders on relationships. It didn't border. It is relationships. And I tell people all the time, that phone, if I could throw that phone away, it would be gone. Because the phone is not doing me any good. I want to see your face. I want to talk to you. I want to be there. Because there's a lot going on that I can't see when I'm on the phone. And our children are losing how they build relationships. When we talk about, I remember, how they got on Biden, with his son and so forth. I said, well, why not? His son has got a wonderful way of getting a good job. How many of us I use my father and my uncles all the time. Whenever I could, throw that little name out there. Yes, we do that stuff. We do it all the time. And we should, because they worked hard for it. They want us to know that it's there for them, for all of us. And so how do we use it? They didn't just do it for nothing. They did it because they wanted us to be a little bit better than they were. So yes, all of that is important. The relationships are important. So it gets to be, who do you know in the diocese sitting next to you, that maybe is not in this cohort or hadn't thought about it, and call them up and say, okay, what you all doing over there, and that's how things get started. That's how things get started. It's the relationships that we've taken the time to build. And then how do we then begin to harness that so that we can then create what we know is important to create? And that is, it's the use of laity. If you would, and I know you do, you could go into your church and find every resource that you needed. Running around, you run around everywhere else, and it's sitting there right in your church. Half the time you don't even know it because you haven't taken the time to know the person in order to find out what gifts do they bring, when they're here in this church. What gifts? And we all bring them, and they're all different. And that's purposeful too, because we're one body. And so it has to be different so that we can connect and use, and be a part of, and not just sitting out here. Does that make sense? I mean, these are things that these are no-brainer things that we have to work at. And we have to, again, have the courage to do it. And we can sit here and say, oh, yes, I do. But when I get back, am I still going to have that courage to step out there, on faith and know that God's with you? He's with you all the time. He's not going to leave you. He said he wouldn't do that. He's not going to leave you. And so we have to walk and step out on that faith and know that he's going to be there for us and know that we have to do this. We have to do it. We are at a point where we can't turn around, because I'm telling you, I don't even know what this world is anymore. I don't know what we have. And that's very scary and frightening. And figure out, how do we say it? And so now, we have the advantage of the pulpit. We have that advantage. And believe me, as I said, they can't fire you. So there's a lot that you can stand up there and say that Stephen or Peter or any of the others, Mary Claire and the rest that are in this room who are priests, could not.
Peter's not a priest.
You're not a priest, Peter. I made you one. You tell them today that Debbie Stokes made you a priest. They'll love that.
That's all it takes.
I know. That's all it takes. So, okay. So does that make sense to you? I mean, we really do need to utilize and understand the importance of it, understand the, what do I want to say, it's delicate, we're vulnerable. We need to be humble, because this is an awesome job. It's an awesome job. And we want to be as worthy as we possibly can, as individuals, as people. So, think long and hard about what you want to say and how you want to say it. And then just go forward. And find out from others, what did you think? What did you go away with? What was the one thing that you took away from what I said today? And find out what that was and what was doing. Now, I'm not sure, Stephen, because I haven't been as involved in the old process. I know what he did with us. I don't know what he's doing with you all. He may have given you a break, because we yelled and screamed when he said it. So you may have thought about it maybe 2 or 3 times. But the other part, like as you're doing now in groups, in your sharing and you're hearing and you are critiquing. And he said to us, and we want you to also do that in your church. So every time you preach, you've got a group, and the group is there to hear you and then to critique you afterwards. And we looked at him like, how many critiques do you want in life? We just keep getting them. You just want people to talk to us, about us, for us, with us. But it is a good idea. He'll say at the end, it is a good idea. Because it gives you an opportunity to sit down, with parishioners, with people that you know. And I chose people that I knew would critique me. I don't know why I would do that crazy thing, but I did. And so you have them in your churches and ask them to be part of a small group, for, I don't know, for a month or 2, just to critique, what you're doing and to use that, okay? So, aren't you happy I support something, Steve?
I'm thrilled. I'm just thrilled.
a couple of things, and I think, and I did talk about, what at the very beginning about what was my worst and actually ended up being my best sermon that I feel that I've done. My sermons, I do pretty much, the same way. I read the scripture, and I read all of them. I mean, both the old and the new. How do they blend in with each other? I've almost, and I haven't quite done it yet, and I'm going to someday, but I almost went to the old altogether, and I can't remember what scripture it was, but it was something that just really hit me, and I really should have done it. I didn't. I chickened out. Because you're just generally going with the gospel, although you can do any of them. I mean, but I'm saying this to say, go with your heart. Go with your heart. I mean, if the Old Testament really speaks to you on that day, speak it. If it's the New Testament, speak it. If it's the Psalm, speak it. Because that's where the passion is going to come from. That's what they're going to hear. And that's what you, in fact, need to do. Okay, so I use them, in some way, but I haven't just gone straight there in that. And I think of Brueggemann, Dr. Brueggemann, when I think about that, because he is so wonderful in that Old Testament. Oh, and when Stephen was talking about Kenyon, the joy of Kenyon was that those 4 or 5 days we were all together, we'd have people like him that were there for the entire 4 days. Now, can you imagine having him around for 4 days? Not only be able to hear him, in a keynote or whatever we're doing, but also to be able just to sit and have conversation. I mean, those were wonderful days. I might start that up again. I'm thinking it's coming back. It really is. Okay. So as I was saying, I will go to that. I also really do a lot of searching in terms of the context, of what it is I'm talking. Because I really want to know, what happened there. The characters that are there, who's involved, what's happening, and what's going on. And, in their life and times, and then putting that and then moving that to where we are today and how close we relate, to what is happening back then as to what is happening now. Not too much of a difference, let me tell you. The brokenness is still here. We still haven't done anything with that at all. I also use feasting on the word is really my biggie. I love that. I love that book. As well as I have all kinds of Bibles, different ones and so forth that lend, different aspects and different ways of viewing and seeing what it is that we're doing. So those are some of the things that I do. I pay attention to the world because that's really what it is I want to try to bring in to whatever it is that, I'm preaching so that you understand, what we're saying. So I do pay close attention to that. And I use my experience, as a social worker. I use my experience as working, and being employed and what that means, today. So I know that within the context of yourself, that there are things that are very passionate for you, whether they be about children, whether it is, drugs or alcohol or mental health, or whatever. And so it gives you an opportunity to really bring that forward. But I will say to you that I'm always, at the end of the day, challenging, and really encouraging and challenging in the sense of this is where we are, but this is where we could be. How do we move from here to here, And let us begin to think about that and to move on that and do things. So I like to really challenge, people in my sermons. You're going to think you're going to hear all this tomorrow, don't you? No way. So in closing, the advice that I can give to you today is certainly be true to yourself. We talk about truth and love. We really need to talk about truth and love. Take advantage of every opportunity to hear and listen to good preaching as you're going through your courses, and that is so important. Anytime you get an opportunity to go somewhere to hear somebody preach, do it. Do it. And if you know of any conferences or workshops or something that's going on, go to them. I know that we require, continuing education, and so you'll be, doing that. This is a lifelong journey, and so it doesn't just stop with the day that you, are able to get certified or licensed. It is a day that really begins that life journey for you. And to utilize your church as a support system, pay close attention to those around you. We often don't like to do that. We like to go in and just think that everything is okay and not really pay attention and ask them questions and so forth if there's something that we think is wrong or they're off today, and it feels like, wow, I just saw you a week ago and this is, what you were doing, and you're coming in today and you look so despondent. What is, what's going on? Is there anything that I can do? We need to begin to do that more. And what I have done with my church, at point I ask them, when I greet them, what has God done for you this week? What has He done for you this week? Can you name me one thing? And get people thinking. Just get people to think about, that and to keep that on their minds. And finally, most importantly, is to enjoy what you do. Just enjoy it. Okay? That's it, Stephen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.